On July 8th, 1997, the world came to an abrupt, screeching halt. When I awoke one morning to find that my family, friends, and neighbors had all been reduced to rotting husks of the people they once were, I went through the 5 stages of grief several times over in a matter of seconds, before settling in denial for a week. I sat on my bedroom floor reading books and watching television to pass the time, waiting for a miracle to return me to my mundane life. I kept waking up wholeheartedly expecting to hear a military broadcast or some sort of announcement from the president. But after my late-night carpentry special cut out one day, it soon became apparent that normal wasn't something to which I'd be returning. Certainly not anytime soon. About a month has passed since then, and I've done fairly well for myself in that time. Today, it's August 20th, and I've devised a plan. Last week, I broke into a warehouse on the outskirts of town. It's surrounded by a thick perimeter of trees, and just beyond that tree line is the Muldraugh Police Department. I would stow the getaway car at the abandoned warehouse, cut through the woods, and sneak into the station undetected. It was a simple plan. I had barely gotten halfway up the road when my engine suddenly stalled. As I struggled to restart the station wagon, a group of nearby zombies began pounding on my driver's side window. As the engine sputtered, I could feel my pulse quickening as it roared back to life. Without a second to hesitate, I shifted gears and took off down the road, narrowly maneuvering around the abandoned cars. After so suddenly being reminded of my own mortality, I hoped I might find another car. Preferably one with a more reliable engine. As I neared the station, I swerved into the parking lot and laid into the horn. I would draw the nearby zombies away from the building before circling back to loot it. I then pulled up to the storage facility and prepared to secure my escape route. Unfortunately, there were a few uninvited guests awaiting my arrival. After dispatching of them, I crept into the woods, only to find out that I wasn't alone. With my escape route compromised and unseen threats in all directions, I plunged myself headlong through the thicket toward the station. When I emerged from the brush, I was met by stragglers who had not been drawn to the sound of my car. I took care of them post-haste. However, I soon realized they were not the only number lying in wait. Across the yard from me stood about a dozen more, and they'd already picked up my scent. I readied myself. After finally thinning their numbers, the bodies piled high. I'd made quite the mess. I rested a moment and caught my breath before continuing my assault. I then hopped the chain link fence and slipped in through the back door. I thought the worst was over, but soon realized that I was now up to my neck in troubled waters. With undead all around me, both inside and out, I was a sitting duck. Tightly enclosed spaces left little breathing room, and with zombies on the other side of the armory door, I had little choice but to wait it out. Once I heard them break through the security door, I knew it was time to act. I waited, listening for the perfect opportunity. If they swarmed me now, it would mean the end of me. But if I could split them up, the armory was mine. A locker room door was now all that separated me from untold numbers of undead police officers. I drew them out to the yard as to avoid being cornered. With the last of them dead, I was finally free to bag the loot. Unfortunately, there wasn't much left worth bagging. A few spare shells and boxes of ammo were strewn about the room. Most notably, I found a magnum, but I preferred my baseball bat and its silent lethality. Having collected what scraps I could, I left the station behind, lifting a nightstick from one of the bodies outside as I left. Quite regrettably, my exit was no more graceful than my entrance, as another cluster of nearby Zeds caught on to me. Using the fence to my advantage, I was able to put a swift end to them. After having dealt with them, I thought to check the parking lot. Perhaps there was a working car I could steal. Of course, a group of undead loitered in my path. I lured them over, dividing their numbers to avoid being overwhelmed. Once the area was finally clear, I began searching the cars. To my surprise, some of them were actually unlocked, even having keys inside. But without gas, they weren't going anywhere. The police cruiser in particular seemed to be in very good condition. A quick peek under the hood confirmed my suspicions. If I could just get some gas in this thing, I would leave the old station wagon behind. While searching the nearby van, my sweet tooth got the best of me. Distracted by the delectable contents of the glove box, I now found myself being surrounded by zombies. Without time to spare, I jumped out of the passenger side door and made ready my weapons. It was after spying an empty jerry can in the trunk of a car that I was met with an idea. I would return to my station wagon and siphon the gas from its tank before riding off in the police cruiser. After all, nothing had gone to plan thus far. What was another detour? When I arrived at my vehicle, the labors of the day weighed heavily, and I opted to rest a while in the safety of my car before returning to the station under the cover of nightfall. When I awoke, I shoveled the contents of my glove box into my backpack and began siphoning the gasoline. Once I was ready, I crept back through the trees as I had done before, ready to lay bare whatever horrors stalked the night. The undead had reclaimed the parking lot in my absence. By this time, my baseball bat had splintered and broken over some sorry fool's head. But the hatchet I kept on my tool belt cut them down with great efficacy. Having taken back the lot, I poured what gas I could into the cruiser. I'd managed about a quarter of a tank, which would more than suffice. In the safety of my new vehicle, I stashed my treasures and collected my thoughts. I could have bailed right there and then, but I didn't. Across the street and up the road a short distance from the station was the mini-mall, and in that mini-mall was the local bookstore. I was searching for one book in particular, Master Carpentry, which would allow me to improve my wood carpenting abilities tenfold. The downside was risking life and limb for a book, which might not even be there. But I took my chances nonetheless. I could use some reading material anyway. It made for a good fire starter if nothing else. I frantically scoured shelves as infected lay siege from all sides. I finally found it and snatched it up within a moment to spare. With the doors breaking and windows shattering, I escaped with my life. Ever thirsting for superior wisdom, and with room to spare in my backpack, my heart gave way to greed. I slaughtered the nearby ghouls one by one before creeping my way back into the bookstore. I searched for anything that might catch my eye and found a copy of Master Cooking. There was money to be found in the register, which was strangely the least valuable paper in the entire store. I continued my search, taking only an assortment of light novels to keep me company in the lonely nights. With no zombies blocking my path, I picked up my feet and ran back to the cruiser. Another pack had gathered in the wings of the car park, but I paid them no mind, ducking into the driver's seat and throwing the keys in the ignition. The car started, and I made my escape, nearly plowing through a small horde in the process. On the ride home, I would avoid hitting any zombies, to the best of my ability, as not to damage the new rig. Down the road from Cortman Medical, I happened upon a police blockade, which was more of a nuisance than an obstacle. I cut through a neighboring backyard and continued on my way. I finally got home at 4:30 in the morning, hungry, thirsty, and utterly exhausted. I ate some leftovers, filled my canteen, and left to secure the perimeter. The neighborhood seemed to be more populated than I had left it. After butchering what remained of the local denizens, I closed up shop for the night and went to bed. I awoke to a rainy afternoon and spent much of the day unpacking and organizing the loot. Still exhausted from yesterday's mission, I tried to catch up on some much-needed rest, only to wake in a fit of panic. It had only been a nightmare, and I soon went back to sleep. The next day, I struggled to shake the lingering air of anxious dread. In my dream, the motel had been overrun. The undead ravaged me, tearing me asunder as my entrails spilled onto the floor. I could do nothing but watch helplessly as I was eaten alive, left only to ruminate on my egregious failure in my dying moments. In an attempt to distance myself from these thoughts, I began to fortify my defenses. I barricaded the infirmary window with some spare planks and gathered what barbed wire I could. I thought to reinforce the downstairs windows with a barbed wire fence. How effective it would be was something I hoped I would never find out. Under thick veil of onset fog, I butchered a group of shamblers. This put my mind at ease. I stripped them of their clothes and threw them in my antique stove for fuel. I then rested a short while on the balcony, reading excerpts from a cookbook. I later began dismantling unused furniture and repurposing it into more useful items. I prepared a delicious meal with what fresh ingredients I still had, and built more shelves in the pantry. After having fed myself, I grabbed my propane torch and a welding mask before melting down my bathroom appliances to acquire knowledge. Afterwards, I sought to destroy the room entirely in order to make room for a staircase. This would grant me access to the roof of the motel, where I could stand watch over my base, and hopefully even construct a greenhouse. While working on this new expansion, I thought I had uncovered an emergency escape onto the ground floor.
I was mistaken. It seemed this window was in fact an otherworldly portal into a long-forgotten dimension, one I dared not linger in.
The existence of this back room unsettled me, and I was unsure of what to do with it. I decided, for the time being, that it was probably best left alone, and I prepared to gather more lumber.
A local crackhead greeted me, and I swiftly murdered him.
Using my hatchet, I cut down some nearby trees and began sawing the logs into planks. Nail by nail and board by board, the fruits of my labor were being realized, and the project was nearing closer to its completion.
Beyond my walls, I spied a stray ghoul. I confronted the monster before bludgeoning its skull into a fine pulp.
I then proceeded to melt down even more bathroom appliances to make room for further expansion, tearing down walls only to rebuild them. Surprisingly enough, I was beginning to feel quite comfortable in my new life here. Perhaps the end of the world hadn't truly been the end of all things, but instead, the beginning of something else. A second chance. Beyond the shadow of tomorrow's dawn lay miracles illuminated and the glimmering hope of salvation. Like my ancestors before me, I worked tirelessly to sustain myself. But it was honest living. And for the while I had power, and running water, too. And while this new world was indeed lonely, with each passing day things were looking better. And there I stood, perched upon the very precipice of oblivion, alone at the end of the world. The spinning yarns of fate and the breadth thereof was now all that separated me between life and death. The devil's war chimes rang out through the air as the armies of hell made manifest upon my doorstep. Over countless days I had labored, working to construct what would become the last bulwark of humanity's hope amidst the peril of the bleak midsummer. Beset from all sides by desperation, heroism takes the stage. I collected the last of my resolve with a deep breath, and with but a few fleeting seconds I rose to face the surmountable odds. For in this moment I knew only two things. This was my home, and I would win the day. With my exhaustion mounting and adrenaline diminishing, the grievous nature of my circumstance became painfully apparent. With my body in its current state, I had but one simple choice to make. With the last of my energy spent, I'd managed to stave off the invaders for a time. Now, the light was fading, the dusk was settling, and the streets were moaning in agony. But behind these walls, the promise of safety. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I held my bat close, knowing fully well what terrors roamed the streets. I awoke in the early hours of the morning, hungry but rested. Now, having had sufficient time to recuperate, I took to the streets to finish the fight. One by one, I hunted them down with an obliterating hatred. The undead had lost the upper hand in their offensive, and now the tables had turned. I brutalized every single abhorrent wretch I encountered that night. With my enemies slaughtered at my feet, I decided to finish what I started. It had cost me all that remained of my innocence, but it was finally done. With the assault behind me, and the future yet unwritten, I knew that if I were to cement my place in this unforgiving world, I would have to build a legacy. That if I am to die by some cruel twist of fate, a part of me may yet live on. And until next time, I continue.